Dan Lefebvre, and he is with Based on a True Story podcast, and you can find him there at Based on a True Story podcast all over the place.
Hmm.
You just type that into anything that you want, and it'll pop right up.
It should, yes.
That's the plan,
That's
right?
the plan, yes.
So I had the pleasure of being on Dan's show, and we talked about Casablanca.
Hmm.
So now, give everybody kind of the you can run over there and listen to that if you want right now, folks, or you can just continue on with this with us. But tell everybody kind of what the concept behind your podcast is.
Yeah, I mean, based on a true story. So we've all seen those movies that claim to be based on a true story. So I dig into how much of it actually happened. So like our chat with Casablanca, how much of obviously it's a fictional movie, but World War II was a real thing, and Casablanca was as we talked about on the episode,
Real place.
There, yeah.
So have you done one on Fargo? Because they said that was a true story.
I have not done Fargo yet.
And I have a feeling maybe not so true.
Maybe not so true. Yeah, I think they did that as I think the Coen brothers did that as a joke at the beginning, to claim it was based on a true story, right? Yeah.
I think it fit with the music because it had kind of the string music at the beginning, and they needed to put something on the screen besides snow. So they're like, hey,
I guess it's only books that have this space left intentionally blank.
Right.
So they just put in based on a true story.
Yeah, based on a true story. Maybe you'll find something that's similar. We don't know. But I mean, it's a cool concept. And so how many of these have you done at this point?
Well, right now I'm working on episode 355, which will come out beginning of December, Pearl Harbor.
And you go by twos or by threes?
No, just one. I've been doing it since 2016.
Okay.
So it's been
one
little
at a
bit.
time.
One at a time. One at a time.
Oh.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that like has come to light that you're like, oh my gosh?
I think something that really just stood out to me is how many movies, using Fargo as an example, even though that was a joke. I mean, movies still use real things to try to cement the world in realism. And so you can pull truth from almost anything. It's just the amount of how much gets thrown in. Like with Casablanca, right? I mean, World War II and a lot of the things that we talked about were real, but they factored a lot of stuff in, or they changed a lot of stuff and, to tell their narrative. Even things like, I've covered like Jurassic Park. I've got an Indiana Jones episode that'll be coming out soon once I get the Pearl Harbor one edited. And those sort of things. I mean, they're fictional. I did Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Another very fictional, but pirates were a real thing. And you'd be surprised how much they pull to try to make it seem more believable and realistic.
So is the anti-podcast artistic license? Is that the antithesis of your based on a true story? The artistic license podcast, would that be?
Yeah. I used to do, I don't really do them anymore, but I used to do little mini-sodes that were like, 5 or 10 minutes that would pick purely fictional movies that used history. So it was kind of a, here's the creative license in that element. But
yeah, that's interesting. So what, obviously I'm assuming, and it's not good to assume, but I'm assuming you're kind of a history person, right?
I've always been interested in history.
And so this is what drew you to this, was it's kind of a amalgam of pop culture and history in a way.
Yeah. So my background, I actually worked in VFX for a while. So my background's more on the movie side. Yeah. But I've always been interested in history. And so when I started this show, so I can kind of give the little origin story. Originally,
that's a hint at his visual effects history there.
I used to do a show for a company that I worked for where we taught 3D software and visual effects software. My specialty myself was in fluid dynamics, RealFlow and Maya and stuff like that, if anybody's familiar with those.
A little bit.
Yeah. So I ran the content marketing team there, and we had a podcast. We had access to artists that worked on movies and games. And so we would interview them on the show as part of that. Tech companies being tech companies, mergers and acquisitions, that office got shut down. But I still wanted to do a podcast. And so I was like, what can I merge like with, I've always been a fan of movies. I've always been a fan of history. And actually it was after going to see Les Mis, the musical at one point, on the ride home, I was in the passenger seat, but I was just looking up how much of this stuff actually happened in the French Revolution. And then when I was looking for an idea for the show, I was like, if I'm looking that stuff up, maybe other people are too. Maybe there's an idea there. And it was just kind of digging down. Are there actually enough movies to do this? Turns out there are. There's a lot.
I pretty much. I mean, at the very least, you can always look up stuff to see, if that happened in that time period. I mean, that's, part of everything's rooted in something, right? I mean, unless you're looking at Veggie Tales or something, I think you're probably pretty good. Although Veggie Tales has a lot of history.
Vegetables aren't real?
Well, their history is suspect.
That's true. Fair point.
But no, I just thinking along the lines of most movies have some kind of are rooted in some type of history, right? So it only, I mean, there's really only if you get into science fiction and fantasy and so forth, where they take on the role of making a new history. That everybody. I mean, even Star Trek. I mean, a prime example is, they make up three things and then throw Abraham Lincoln on the end, and it's like rooted in history. You know what I mean? If it's Tyrrhenius and, Terilius, and then of course Abraham Lincoln, and they're like, what? They somehow draw it all back together to our reality in some way. A lot of things do, but that's fascinating. So you loved the process so much when you were doing it in essentially a marketing platform, right? The whole idea for what you were doing it for originally was for marketing, right?
Right. Yeah. It was a branded show, branded for the company. And so it was pure marketing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, but then the process, was it the process that really was, what did you like so much about it? You're like, not only do I want to do this to make money, I just want to do it because I want to keep myself busy.
Well, I didn't make money for the first few years. It was just, it ended up growing to
where
the
the marketing thing was making money, right? So.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. Yeah. It was getting to pick the brain of people that I'd never really have a reason to talk to otherwise. I think probably, I get to talk to like the scientists that worked on the interstellar black holes, right? And some of the science behind that. And then talking to, this is the original show. And then talking to like the company that makes Google stages, like they make all those custom screens and everything like that. And for their big shows, right? And everything has to be all, amazing to view, not only in person, but, there's huge productions that go on. And I'd never really have a reason to talk to them otherwise. Right? And so I just get to ask all these questions that I've always wondered. And so, yeah, I think that really is what.
So you're like a super inquisitive type person is what you're saying.
I love learning things.
Because I mean, your Les Mis example, right? So I would say, you thought, hey, is there somebody, I'm sure there's somebody else doing it, but is there a lot of people doing that? I would probably say no. I mean, that would be my first inclination because we have all of this technology and you have your pocket portal to the world, and most people still go, I wonder if, this is such, and I'm like, well, look it up. They're like, oh, you know what I mean? I don't know that. I think it's going to be a generational thing where we're finally, people are tuned in to the point where they just don't say those kind of things anymore. What do you think?
Don't say like to look it up.
Well, no, they don't vocalize their wonderment of something because they are too lazy to look it up or don't think about it. Now they're just going to look it up.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of at least in my own mind. Sometimes it's I watch something and I'm really curious right after the fact, but give me a couple hours and then I get sidetracked with something else, and I'm not really going to look that up anymore. So it is kind of a spur of the moment type thing for a lot of them, I think.
The rabbit hole effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get pulled in all these different directions. So maybe that is what's choice. We're living with choice lock in the digital age right now, because we can investigate anything, but as soon as we start investigating something, we investigate something else.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you get the Wikipedia rabbit holes, right? Yeah, that you just go down. Yeah, definitely done that a few times.
So, if you had to pick one movie that you've done in your 355, would you say?
Yeah, 355 is what I'm
355
working on next. I
think,
300. Casablanca was 354. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then is there one that you're like, I did this one and this was so, fulfilling in doing. I learned so much that, this is my golden episode.
It might seem like kind of a cop-out answer to say that's the way I feel about everyone that I do, because I think it's some of that, because it's fresh and new, like I just watched the movie and then I've done research on it and then I get to talk to somebody about it. And then that kind of goes away for the next one, the next one takes over. There are some people though that I've talked to that have literally taken years to get on the show. So when I finally do, it's like, it's amazing to actually get to talk to them. Things like
what are they doing all this time? They can't make an hour.
They have other jobs and things like that going on, right?
I'm just wondering. I mean, that's a long time, years. I mean, this is like a job. You're working hard.
I mean, I think a lot of it is timing. A lot of the people that I talk to are historians and authors and things. And if they're in the middle of working on a book, then they don't want to focus on anything else. Same for, the Pearl Harbor episode that I had to kind of wait around his schedule because he was off doing some consulting on another show somewhere.
Oh, okay.
So things like that, or, one of the guys that I did Marty Morgan, I've had him on the show many times, but he's also a tour guide. He does tour guides, tours out in Normandy and, the World War II history areas. And
wow.
And so when he's off doing that, he's not going to be on the show.
Right.
So I kind of catch him at certain times.
But he's got to come home at some point.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's one of those things of I try to schedule my episodes so that if it takes a year to get somebody on the show, it's just a matter of email communications here and there. I don't actually do a lot of work on it until once we have the day scheduled that this is when it's going to be, that's when I'll actually go in and start actually working.
Do you have like a big board? Do you have these things planned out well into the future then? Because I mean, waiting a year that's a commitment.
Yeah. Well, so I don't schedule them out until I actually have it recorded. So until
the planning, even like, you're like, okay, I want to do this. So obviously you're waiting a year on something. You've got something in mind for that person to talk about. Yeah. And so it's taking a year for them to get back to you. So that to me, that's like development time, right? Even though maybe you're not working on it every day, but
Yeah, no, I'm not working on it every day. And it's at that point, it's, sending an email every now and then, be like, hey, you still interested when we schedule a time, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So, but
that's persistence there. There's something to that.
Yeah. It takes, one thing that I've learned from all of this is if somebody says no, it doesn't always mean no always. It just maybe not now. Because they're busy right now or something like that.
I was way too easy. I should have just told you to hold your horses and sent you on your way for a while.
You make it easy on me. I do appreciate that.
I just like what, Friday? Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
I've already watched the movie.
Yeah.
So, but no, well, it's fascinating though, because, you have all these people of note, right? And then, I'm not a person of note, but it sounds like you reach out to some really interesting people. I mean, is there one person that stands out in your mind that you're like, I can't believe that this person actually agreed to talk to me about a movie?
Probably It would probably be Lady Carnarvon, but Downton Abbey. I just never really thought that I would get to talk to her. Quite honestly, I've extended the invitation, but I never expected her to say yes.
Yeah. And so how did that go down? Was it just like how did you get the email, or how did you get the contact? That's the other question.
So here's another, I guess, I don't know if it's say an industry secret or a tip or anything like that, but if somebody has a book coming out, they want to promote it. And so that's where the timing can come in. So she actually had written a lot of history of Highclere Castle, which is where they filmed Downton Abbey. That's her house as the Earl and Lady.
Right.
And so, you find the timing right. I actually scheduled everything through her agent, PR agent, or something like that, and and then sit down and have the conversation.
So you preyed upon their weakness, which is publicity.
I mean, it's that's podcasts are, right, marketing and
Yeah. So. No, well, this is fascinating because obviously you came to this from, so podcasting has been going on long enough now that you came to podcasting via a commercial means, right? Whereas, when it started, it was all hobbyists and so forth. And now you slotted into it basically as a part of your job.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. I mean, I should know this, but to me, I haven't really had this conversation directly with anybody like that, to where that was their entrance into this kind of world. As I was talking to somebody else the other day, industry, because it's an industry now, right? So it's far beyond being a hobbyist kind of thing. It can still be a hobby, but it's an industry now, and you're part of this industry, and now you're preying upon elderly highbrow people in England when they want to publish a book.
Just helping get the word out a little bit more.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You put it better. You put it more in marketing speak.
There you go. Exactly.
Here I am bending your words to make it sound terrible.
Can always spin it with marketing.
But that's fascinating. So, because I mean, I would have never thought of that. This is I'm getting into your thought patterns a little bit. It's fantastic. So, you're talking to these people who are historians, and they're like, yeah, I'll talk to you about this crummy movie and tell you how bad it is or whatever, and then you get to have these interactions. That's fantastic. So what do you think, what's, you mentioned Pearl Harbor and Indiana Jones and so forth. So, I mean, is there anything that you don't want to talk about in the realm? Like if I said, let's talk about, what's his name? Jodorowsky's Dune, which was a documentary. I can't remember his first name, but I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. But
I'm not
okay.
No, not familiar with that one.
So there was going to be a Dune movie made by this kind of wacky, crazy director, and there's a documentary about him trying to make the Dune movie before the David Lynch Dune movie back in '84. Back in the 70s, and he had like casting and everything, but he was just kind of an eccentric director. He made movies. I mean, he's not unknown, but his version of Dune was going to be kind of even wackier than David Lynch's version of Dune. But Neil Jodorowsky? Anyway, I'll have to look that up. But is there any topic or movie that you're like, we're not going to talk about that?
I can't think of one.
You haven't encountered one yet, then? Huh?
I haven't encountered one yet. I mean, I've covered even things like politics and religion, which are the taboo subjects. But I still try to come from all of those from a historical perspective and covering the things that are in the movie. So if there's something that's not in the movie, not really, it's kind of outside the scope. My basic concept or my basic thought process when I'm preparing for it all is I've watched this movie and I want to be the person that's looking in and learning more about it, but all I know is from what I've seen in this movie. I don't know anything else. And so I try to come as like, I'm the viewer that just watched the movie and I'm asking a historian all the questions about what I would want to know after I watched it.
So is there more enjoyment in the movie or in the history for you?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it depends on the movie. I mean, it depends.
So, okay. So what that tells me is you're telling me that the entertainment value of a movie can usurp the history.
Yeah. I mean, I think like anything, I don't think there's anybody that loves every single movie out there or, loves every single period of history. Right. I mean,
so I never thought about it that way. So for me, history is more kind of factual as opposed to entertaining. And so, but you're looking at it from a different lens because you look at that as it's interesting and entertaining to you as opposed to just like, that's what it is.
And so there's a lot of nuance in that. And you mentioned that, the factual side, and there is that part too. For example, Napoleon's a great example. I think he's probably the most documented person in history. So we know a lot of facts. But sometimes history, we don't know. Like, I was talking with Joshua Levine. He was the historical consultant for Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. And so I talked to him about that movie. And he made a really great point that the Dunkirk operation, that whole thing, different people had different experiences. He said he talked to somebody who hid in an ambulance throughout the whole thing, and that was their experience. They were trying not to, get shot by the plane, so
not to get killed. Yeah,
but that was their experience. Very different. We don't see that in the movie. That's very different than what a lot of other people experienced there. But that was their experience, and so I think depending on what perspective and what angle you tell the story, and that's where movies start to get very interesting because they have to pick what is the angle we're going to tell. And so a lot of times we lose a lot of the context around that. And so that's another element that I like to throw in and is what are some other elements that we're not seeing in the movie that helps tell this story a little bit better.
That's interesting. Okay. That's interesting because then, Dunkirk, by the way, fantastic movie. Yeah. I mean, to me, better than the history because that was much more entertaining, I'd
rather watch the movie than sit.
Yeah, I'd rather watch the movie than hear a lecture on it. Honestly, yeah. And but that's really interesting the way you're talking about this because it and I think folks on average, I'll make in general, whatever you want to say, don't think about the fact that when you set up the movie, you have to pick your point of view to an extent, right? Nothing's ever neutral in entertainment.
Right.
And you have to, pick your position. And then, I mean, you can always mirror it against, the opposing position and try to play that in the movie. But you are, taking on that position when you're making it. To be, would it be interesting to see a World War II movie, which I think didn't Clint Eastwood did this. What was that World War II movie made from the Japanese perspective?
He did Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. Yeah,
two separates. Yeah. But he took the position on each from their side, which is unusual. That's why I guess I remember that. And but then that shows you, right? It shows you the perspective in a way. Yeah. Have you done those two movies, by the way?
I haven't done those two, no. And that's kind of one of those that I think to do it right, you'd have to do both of them at around the same time,
right?
Because they were both made at the same time, and they are telling the same story from different sides, like you said. So
yeah, different perspective. Now, there's other movies that do that kind of as a kind of a gimmick in a way, but not historically as much as those two, I suppose. So yeah.
Interesting. The Pearl Harbor, I'm doing Tora, and they kind of do that in a single movie. where they have the Japanese side and the American side. But it's one movie, not obviously not separate.
I know, but I don't. I mean, I haven't seen Tora Tora in a long, long time. But I always thought they kind of villainized the Japanese in that movie. But maybe I'm wrong in my remembrance of things.
I guess I wouldn't say they were necessarily villainized. I mean, they were the aggressor. They did the surprise attack. So
yeah,
there's that. But they had, I think, I don't remember their names, but I think they had, the Japanese directors shooting the Japanese scenes and the American directors shooting the American scenes.
Oh, okay.
And, kind of separate. So that's kind of where I was. Some of the production side of it, I think, was similar to telling, the same story from different sides, and then they put it all into one movie as opposed to, Flags of Our Fathers.
How interesting. Okay. And so then if you, what's the peak, right? So you're going along here. I mean, do you have a list of ones that you want to do into the future that you're like looking for people, or you're like my hit list or whatever, I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah.
How many is on that list?
I'd have to pull it up and look, hundreds, and always adding more. Not only myself adding them, but also listener requests getting added in. Like I said, I don't schedule them until I actually have it interview. Like the interview is set, right? So yeah. So there's a lot of them, like that. Joshua Levine actually was one that took over a year to get him on the show, because he was busy working on another movie or something.
Right.
But, and so
he didn't have a book to sell right
yeah,
then.
I didn't know that I was going to have him on the show. So I wasn't going to, put it in the release schedule or anything like that until I actually have them. So there is a little bit of that element to it where there's a lot of them that I want to do, but until I actually have it booked, and then I'm not going to,
right. Yeah.
It's a little vague. It's a little, play it by ear a little bit on that side.
Do you think that you're going to exhaust this, or is it just keep like, do you just keep adding to the list, you feel like?
I don't think I'm ever going to get through the whole list. But I don't know. I guess I'll find out if I ever get burnt out and exhausted by it. There's just so many different topics, though. I mean, even just the ones that we've talked about so far. We've talked about World War II. We talked about Indiana Jones. We've talked about Casablanca back in the movie from the 40s, movie from the 70s, and Tora. I mean, there's so much variety and so many different things that. Again, I just love learning. So there's so many, I don't know that I would get tired of it.
Is there an era that you like more than others?
It'd be World War II, probably. My dad was huge into World War II movies, which is partially why I kind of got into movies and history and that.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's probably the era that I probably covered the most. I don't know if that's just because there are a lot of World War II movies.
There's a lot of World War II movies
to cover. But also it's just something that's always fascinating to me too. So
yeah, well, I was just going to ask you, what do you think? Why do you think there's so many World War II movies? I have a smart aleck answer, but I'll take your serious answer first.
I think there's two elements to it. I think one, it was a moment in history years in history that changed the course of world history. But also I think there's elements to it that is rather rare in a lot of wars, because you have the Third Reich that just completely fell. So we got all those top secret documents that they were hiding, and now the government's not there anymore. So we have an open look into what they were doing that we don't get in a lot of other wars when, the country is still around, they lose the war, but all their top secret documents aren't right. They're all public, but we have access to them.
The Cold War, we probably don't know everything in the Cold War yet.
Exactly.
From Russia, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think it's something where it's easier to tell a story when you know all those dots and you can connect them a lot better.
Well, and one of the atrocities of this is that the Germans were such good documenters. I mean, it's bad and it's good and it's bad all at the same time, because they had such a a plethora of material for you to look at, showing all the terrible things they were doing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, there was no mistaking it. It's like they, they recorded themselves doing it. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that goes along with this idea.
And you try to, so for a lot of those atrocities too, you try to wrap your head around it. And how would anybody do this? Why would anybody do this? And a lot of that documentation doesn't give straight up answers, but it gives the closest sort of answers that you can get to why would somebody do this sort of thing, to try to understand some of those, why do people do evil things, right? And that's probably one of the best examples of in a time period in history where you get to see the other side of it and some of the thought processes that went into that.
Yeah. Do you think if you had to pick something besides World War II, what would be another one? I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are.
It would be
a number two, the World War II, not World War One. Let's get that one.
Not World War One. It would be medieval times. So King Arthur was probably one of the as a kid, I just loved King Arthur, and that was one of the first history things that I kind of researched on my own outside of World War II movies and things. And so that was another one. I got to talk to Professor Dorsey Armstrong, who was the person who I learned the most from about King Arthur, as watching and reading a lot of her work. And then I got to actually talk to her and talk about the King Arthur movie. So I think that would probably be the next time period, would be like medieval times and that era.
So are you going to do Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
I already did Life of Brian.
Because I mean, that's medieval. It's the Arthur mythos.
I would love to do that at some point. Yes, that would be a lot of fun to do. Yes.
Yeah. Life of Brian. The interesting thing about Life of Brian is that the Arthur mythos is kind of a parallel to the Jesus mythos in a way, right? So they're all kind of two sides of the same coin in a weird way.
Yeah, you have that whole good versus evil and that element.
Yeah, that's why. But again, that is over and over and over and over and over again, right? So that if you look into the the kind of the biblical nature of some of these things, that story device, plot device, whatever you want to call it, is everywhere. I mean, it is like it's like soy. Whenever you're trying to extend the life of food or something, you've got all this soy in it. But
just add a little more.
Yeah, but it's the filler, right?
Yeah.
But that's interesting as well. That there's so much of that's spread into things, right? Because I mean, even the Matrix, for goodness sakes, is a Christ story, in a way.
Yeah, I remember when that came out, the number of churches that I saw around doing the story of the one, right?
All right. Yeah, and so I mean that's it's wild to think about. I mean, really, we're so connected to that. Whatever that story, whatever you want to call that story, right? The creation. I don't know what you call that. What would you call that? What kind of story is that? It's not man versus man. It's not man versus
that's a good
himself.
question.
It's not man versus nature. It's man versus a deity in a way.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know. I think one of the reasons why it's used a lot, I think, is because, like you're saying, like it works, and movies are business. And so if something is going to put people in the seats, you're going to throw some of that element in there. And so that's why you get a lot of these repeated storylines, or even trying to force history into some of these repeated storylines to tell that, because it works. It's going to sell. I'm always reminded of, I think it was The Alamo that Dr. Hardin worked on when I taught. He was a historical consultant on the 2004 Alamo movie. And he made a great point. Like when he would go to talk to the director, he's like, my job as a historical consultant is to tell you what, if this actually happened, like in this scene that we're shooting today, like how much of this actually happened. And then the director makes the conscious decision to differ from that or not, creative license or not, right? And sometimes they're going to do that on consciously deviating from history because it is a movie, and if they're not can't sell tickets, they can't sell. I guess you don't sell DVDs anymore, but you know, can't sell it. Yeah, if you can't sell it, then what are they doing?
So that must be a really difficult job, especially if you're somebody who really likes the accuracy of things. Can you imagine being the consultant and like they're doing nothing as it was? I mean, other than they took the names and, you know, the place, the Alamo, right? They're like, okay, yeah, we got all these guys here, Jim Bowie and all that kind, and it's at the Alamo. But guess what? You know, he has a space rifle, and you know, and these poor historical people are like, there's no way, you know, he didn't have flip up sunglasses, or, I mean, they always get on somebody for all these little technical. I remember Django Unchained. It's something about his sunglasses would never have been around in that time period for Jamie Foxx was wearing in that movie. And so, you know, the poor guy who's trying to have accuracy has to basically watch it all happen. And even though he's in the ear, he's like, you know, there's no way in hell this ever happened this way. Oh, we're shooting it that way. And then he's like sitting in the corner, dejected.
Yeah,
or I guess he gets paid. So
I was going to say, I mean, I think it's kind of like the buck stops at the director. They're the ones that make the decisions on set, right? So I think, fortunately, I think most people recognize that. And so if you look at the historical consultant on a movie, you recognize that they're not the ones that are making those choices necessarily, you know, and so they're going to be consulting, but they're not making the final decisions. Another great example, you mentioned the glasses, and it's not really glasses, but I think it was Master and Commander. I talked to Gordon, the historical consultant, on that one. And he was talking about how the uniforms that they actually wore, I don't remember the time period, 1800s, 1700s, something like that. Master and Commander, but the uniforms that they wore just wouldn't really look good on screen. And
right.
So the director came to him and was like they wanted to find something that would be more historic, not accurate, but, you know, of period, and also look good. And so it was kind of a mixed match of different uniforms and equipment and all that kind of stuff is what ended up getting used. And
no, but see, when you said it, now chances are, let's be honest, that's not going to affect the monetary outcome of the movie if you have this, you know, nice looking uniform as opposed to one that's not quite as nice. You think?
You know, I think that there's a lot of subtleties in movies, and I think everything that we see on screen is there for a reason. Especially for big budget movies like that, all those decisions get made, and if it's not meant to be on there, it's not going to be on there. And so whether or not it actually affects it or not, you know, who knows? But those are the sort of decisions that the director makes.
Dan, you should be a politician. You're so good. You need to run this next cycle because now
I don't know about that.
You're doing a good job of, you know, poking holes in my argument there. So the other thing is, like, so now we have something that happens now, right, in the age of Marvel, where is it historically accurate to the comic?
Yeah.
So now where does that fall on the scale? Because it's history in the regard to how it was originally published, but it's not history as in it actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten into that kind of stuff with comics. Probably the closest I came to that was 3 years in a row. I did on April 1st. I did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, my favorite books, and so I compared the books to the movies.
Okay. Well, how they were published is to opposed to how they were presented in the film. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the, you know, the Tolkien fan base probably really like that because they are very adamant about adhering to the source.
Right. Yeah. And I actually got to talk to, I don't know if you saw the Tolkien biopic that they had. I think it was 2019.
I think I did watch that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I talked to John Garth, a Tolkien scholar who wrote
Mm-hmm.
the only book about Tolkien during World War One, about that movie. And so it was a great little, I got to cover all the different movies compared to the books. And then I got to talk to him about that. And so being that the Lord of the Rings are my favorite books, that was just, again, another thing, like, why would I ever have a reason to talk to someone about that?
You're inventing reasons to talk to these people. You're like, hey, got a book to publish.
It's a great thing about podcasting.
So we've reached this. So what does it matter? Like if you want to be accurate to source material as opposed to accurate to history, I mean, it's essentially the same thing, except it's, you're replacing the reality of living in it to the reality of your imagination living in it. Does it matter?
I think it's going to be it depends. It depends on the situation. Where I think just from history side, not necessarily the source side, because I haven't read a lot of comic books actually, but from the history side, there's only so much you can do on screen when you start to get to a long timeline, like you're talking about somebody's entire life, Napoleon's entire life, for example, in a couple hours. And then you also have, when you're talking about Marvel, you have ensemble characters, right? And there's even more beyond that. And so, but when you're watching a movie, you can't really focus on. I think we've seen that a lot in all of the superhero movies, where some of them they just try to do too much in a single movie,
right? Yeah.
But it's still not nearly as much as is in the realm of the comic books, if you call those the source, right?
Right.
And so I think that's where a lot of it comes to the screenwriters and the directors and the production behind it. It'd be like, at the end of the day, this has to be entertainment and it has to tell a story on screen that makes sense.
Now because I mentioned it, I have to bring this up, and we'll see where our political Dan goes on this one. But so the Bible, accuracy to the Bible, right? The Bible's the source. Is the Bible historically accurate?
I had a very fascinating conversation with a scholar about the Passion of the Christ. From a historical point of view. Now he was a theologian, so he was Christian, but it was fascinating to talk about that, because it's impossible to separate the history of the Bible and the religious side of it. But also, there's not a lot of other historical documents that talk about the same sort of things that are in the Bible. So we don't really know a lot of that. And that's how it is sometimes in history. You just don't know the answers. And we don't like that as humans. We want to know the answers, but sometimes we just don't know the answers.
You dodged that one again, Dan.
I'm just running for office here.
That's okay. I'm just thinking of these things on the fly, so I'm like, hey, I'll throw it out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good one. But I think that's where, if you do believe, then it's faith, and you're going to have faith that it's real. But from a historical side, the historians want to have other documents that support more than one source. And with the Bible, unfortunately, don't have that many other sources.
You might say Life of Brian is more historically accurate than the greatest story ever told.
I was actually surprised when I talked to Adele Reinhardt about the Life of Brian, how accurate it was. I mean, it's satirical comedy, but accurate to the sources that we have. They really did a lot of research, and they did a good job of telling the story, but also telling it in a way that it's Brian and not Jesus. And so you get to have some fun with it, because it is Monty Python after all.
Right.
So you're going to have that, but
there was false prophets at the time that were popping up. I mean,
there still are.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. and it happened again and again. And so it's not like it was. I think when people watch it, they think it's so far fetched, but it really wasn't far fetched at all. I mean, the comedy and the absurdity of it, but not the the story itself.
I think, and that's something
possible.
that a lot of people don't. The far fetched side of it, you think it's far fetched, but also a lot of people now have a hard time putting yourself in the historical context of what life was like, especially that far back. And it was just a different time period where the motivations of people weren't necessarily the same. And, the daily life for somebody was very different than it is today. And so when you're watching a movie, you think of it, like I'm in 2024 and this is the way life is here now. And so I'm watching this movie of something that happened thousands of years ago, but you still have your own reality that you're kind of comparing it to a little bit. And the reality back then that was real was different. It was very different than now. And so you're going to have some of that mismatch, I think, too, that gets thrown in.
Yeah. Like everybody's got these terrific teeth in all these historical movies when, dental hygiene wasn't really a thing.
Yeah, but that doesn't really look good on screen. So
No, we don't want
that they change that.
We don't want to see a lot of toothless people in this movie. Yeah, in the medieval movie, right?
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. So, do you? Where do you think? I actually it's going to go into the future and so forth. So, are you just going to go with it until you kind of get bored, or is there an end game for you as far as the show goes?
Not right now. I mean, I've gotten to the point to where it is helping to pay the bills and keep the lights on. So, and I love doing it. So as long as those two things coincide, then I don't know why I would stop doing something that I love to do that also helps pay the bills, right? I mean, you all got to do something to pay the bills. So might as well do something you love.
Do you have a day job as well, or is it a combination, or are you
not
just
anymore?
Doing this?
I went full time 2019, so I started in 2016, and then the job that I had ended. They shut that company down in 2019, and at that point, I was making about the same as I was on the salary. So I was just like,
really,
give it a try. Fantastic. Let's give it a try and see.
Good for you.
I will say I do other content as well. I also create training and things like that too. So it's not just the podcast. I have multiple streams.
Oh, okay. So you kind of have your own little company then at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So this is just one part of it.
Yeah. So, that's fantastic. Did you want to mention that or no? You don't want to talk about that?
Oh, it doesn't matter. It's just a very different. I do like project management and Photoshop training and things like that. So it's very different than history and movies.
Gotcha.
So just very different audiences.
But that's interesting though, because essentially it is, kind of one and the same a little bit. I mean, obviously you're when you're training this particular products and so forth, when you talk about Photoshop and I'm assuming other Adobe products as well. So what do you think, just spinning off of that, what do you think about all this AI imagery and Photoshop specifically in the AI game now?
Yeah, I haven't really been impressed with their AI, built-in AI.
No.
But I guess I will say it's similar to, I've been using Photoshop, so I think I started on version 4, so long time ago. And even then people were saying like, oh, if you can manipulate images, how are we going to know what's real? And I think it may have gotten more complex, but I think that is still the case. But I think a lot of it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, where people might look it up and they might not. Right. And that's just the way it is. I think with a lot of imagery where you might not know that this is real or not real. But there's been, look at going back to movies, Jurassic Park, right? Look at that. Obviously the dinosaurs weren't real. So,
really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Surprise.
Yeah. I swear there was a dinosaur wrangler in the credits.
Except for Steve. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where people have to get better at doing some fact checking of their own, of the things that they're consuming. And that's just going to get more and more with AI imagery. I think that's going to get more and more prevalent. It's always been that way for things like text and stuff like that. Maybe still images here and there because of Photoshop and things. But once you get into the visual effects side of things with, 3D and, top tier, it takes a lot of work and a lot of knowledge to be able to do that. Still can be done. And I can tell a fun story about how we did that with the training company at one point to fool people. But but it's one of those things. I think a lot of it is there's people who fall for just, lies in text too. So I think you just got to do some of your own research on things to figure out where it comes from.
To me, the funny thing is that we're going to have AI programs that figure out AI programs, right? So it's going to look at a picture and tell you whether or not it was made with AI via an AI.
Which is, I think, But isn't that how it's always been? I mean, computers have always, the AI intelligence, I guess, is different than computers historically, but also AI has become this kind of a buzz term where people are using it for everything. Just like, remember when it was the cloud? Everything is the cloud, right? Where
everything's the cloud.
It's just somebody else's computer server somewhere,
where's
right?
this cloud at? Yeah. I always call it, instead of calling it AI, I call it artificial plagiarism. Because it's just a computer that's going out and taking everybody else's work and condensing it down to make it its own, which is what plagiarists do. But same thing with the Photoshop, right? Yeah. So it's taking some kind of set of images and then reconstructing those images, inside its set, from that set to make another image. And so I think we'll find, over time that unless they can keep amassing images, that eventually there'll be obvious telltale signs of where it came from, because there's going to be like markers, right? So it's going to be like, okay, this means that it pulled from this set and this is in this set. The interesting thing is, so as we go forward in things, this actually is very, what do you want to say? This is very odd coincidence. So I just talked to somebody recently about an AI voice thing, which basically takes everybody's, it can listen in or be fed in to a system, and then it will, aggregate all the information inside that conversation down to things. And so what could happen is your podcast could be aggregated down to its historical markers, and then those become in other areas as historical facts.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be weird?
It would be kind of weird. I think also, like, you think of almost 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now,
or 20.
How many other supporting documents will there be to prove that? And I kind of like what we're going back to, talking about the Bible and having that one source, but also what other sources are there? That'll be interesting to see, as we're going into, we are in a much more digital age where you have that stuff. Historically speaking, a lot of that research is done with actual physical documents because they did it right on paper, right? But it's not really that way anymore. So it will be interesting to see how historians in the future are able to verify that, this document, this digital document, this PDF right here is fact, but this one was AI generated. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think the reality is they're not going to be able to, because if you can imagine, and somebody's going to come up with this or has this, out there, they're going to be able to go in and just like a PDF and say, find Dan Lefebvre and replace with Bob Lament. Bob Lament did all this, not Dan Lefebvre.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it'll populate through a digital realm, and there'll be no concrete hard copy version of anything to tell you that Dan Lefebvre ever did anything.
Yeah, unless there's the original source files also digitally out there somewhere too, and they haven't been erased. Think of like they did that in ancient Egypt. Like they used to chisel.
Yeah, they chisel names
right?
away.
That's the same sort of thing. They're just they're covering it up. Same sort of thing. Different technology, obviously.
But the chances of them finding those original files, because everybody's lazy, Dan, they're just going to type it into Google, and then if they replace everything, it's like, oh well, Dan didn't exist. You know what I mean?
No,
so
that's fair. That's
it could have. I mean, it is. I would surmise it has happened, and we just don't know it. But it will happen in the future.
What's the concept of history is written by the winners, right?
Right. Yeah.
So they just cover up, conveniently lose all that other documentation,
exactly,
and then write the history they want.
Oh man, now you're getting into mind blowing things. What if? The conspiracy theorists, what if all of this German amassed documentation was just a ruse that they actually filmed after the war and then, gave everybody, I'm sure somebody's got that theory out there somewhere, but
I'm sure that's
you know what I mean though, because it just boggles the mind and it's becoming easier and easier and easier. So just in case, in wrapping up, this says, based on a true story podcast by Dan Lefebvre. Maybe it won't say that in the future. We don't know. They'll have changed my voice to say something totally different. And but if you're interested in those kind of things, you got to go check it out. It's fantastic and fascinating, and a world of possibilities exists by listening to these things to find out what you've been lied to about all these years in the popular culture that you so love, and
what it got right.
Sometimes
it gets it right. You never know. Sometimes
the positive doesn't sell books, Dan. We gotta go with that.
That's fair. Good point.
Doesn't sell movies. No. Is there anything else you want to tell folks or that you want to bring out here? Like, you got this new venture going on or anything else going on?
Not in particular. No, just rounding out the year, it's
it's already almost over. Yeah. Can you believe 25?
No.
Goodness. Yeah, I can't either. Gosh.
No.
I remember Conan O'Brien singing year 2000. Gosh. Well, he didn't sing it, but one guy, checks. That's right. Well, thanks, Dan, for being here today, and thanks everybody. And come back next time, and be sure to go check out. I mean, you can go on the socials, you can go on the Googles, you can go to the podcast site, you can go wherever you want, based on a true story, and watch a few. You don't have to watch Casablanca if you don't want to. It's fine. You won't hurt my feelings.
Yeah, but you should. But it's okay.
You might hurt Dan's because he really had a lot of fun.
It was a fun chat with you, Bob. I appreciate you coming on to talk about that.
Thanks, Dan. Hold on just a second, and we're out for today, and we'll talk to you all next time.